Hi everyone. We've got another paper here written by a student that's critiqued an article that was set recently. Now, this article is the lived experience of vulnerability from a Gypsy Roma traveller perspective by Vanessa Heaslip, Sarah Heen, and Jonathan Parker. And this was published in the Journal of Clinical Nursing, and it's a 2016, I think. I'm just trying to see. Yes. Okay. So, to the student paper here. Now, firstly, the student has given us an introduction, which you can see, ending here. But the student sort of starts in this paragraph with a general statement about why research is important, that kind of thing, and that's really lovely. Okay, then the student goes on to say, to get to the nuts and bolts of what they're going to do in the paper. And she says here, this essay will demonstrate the critique process, so, and is telling us the paper. She's telling us what's going to happen. So she's saying, the key components of title, abstract, blah, 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 will be discussed, and so on and so forth. Okay, so she's telling us what will be in the paper, and that's important. The student then moves on to the title. And so following the method that most of you will know if you've been listening to the other lectures and things, is that in your critique, you're going to tell the reader what should be in that part of the article, tell them what it is in the article, and what's the difference, or did they do it well, that kind of thing. Okay, so your critique is that third thing of, did they do it well, or is there something that's missing here? So let's look at the pattern that this student has followed. She tells us what's there. The title of research piece should be blah, blah, blah. Bernard Newell. Lovely. So when you're telling the reader what should be in that particular component, like the title or abstract, you need to use a reference there. And she's used Bernard Newell. Lovely. She goes on to say the title of this article was effective in specifically and concisely describing the nature and content of its research. And then she goes on to, as it is known that a phenomenology approach is a way of researching people's perceptions of their experience and revealing human meaning. Lovely. It can be assumed that this article is a qualitative study. However, it is not explicitly indicated in the title. Now, this last section is her critique. Okay. So what she's said is, it's concise, lovely. So let's have a look at the title again. So she has been able to work out that from lived experience, she's worked out that it's a phenomenology study. And because of that, she has then said, I've got to go and find out what lived experience means. It's phenomenology. It is a way of researching people's perceptions, experiences, so on and so forth. And it's qualitative. All right. But she's critiqued it by saying, but they didn't tell us it was a qualitative study. And that is right. Okay. They set out the setting. Lovely. Like the Gypsy Roma traveller. They told us who they were going to be doing their research on, but they didn't say what sort of a study. And the title means something to somebody who knows a little bit about research. But what happens if you were doing something for work and wanted to look at vulnerable groups? And this is something that might come up, but because you may not have a background in research, you'd look at this and go, well, I don't know about what this is, whether it is qualitative or quantitative. I don't really know. I'd have to look further, and often that's where people are stopped, which is why it's important to have all that there. Okay, so the student goes on to tell us what should be in the abstract, and then, like, here's the section on what should be there. Here's the section of what is there. Okay, so and she's done a nice job there. What she does is that, and actually this sentence here is a critique. What she's done there is she said to us, The relevance of this research topic to nursing practice is initially unclear. However, using lay terminology throughout the abstract, the reader is persuaded on the significance of vulnerability to general health and effectively informed of the content and logistics of the research as well as the key findings. And that is important because effectively, you're looking at vulnerable groups here, and when you go on to look at it, there may be applicability in other contexts. And so this is effectively what that abstract is conveying to that this student got from that abstract. She then goes on to talk about the introduction, tells us what should be there. Lovely. Then she tells us what is there, and then here's her critique. Although not located within the introduction, the research topic is later narrowed into specifically stated aim. There you go. So she's critiqued that, it probably would be good to be there so that we actually know the aim of the research. Okay, so again, tells us what should be there in the background. Very nice. Nice references there. There should be a critical synthesis of existing literature, and so on and so forth. Then she goes on and says, this research piece synthesizes literature that categorizes and links specific health concerns of the Gypsy Roma traveller internationally to generate an overall health picture and the general concept of vulnerability of marginalised communities within the wider society, which is then applied to the Gypsy Roma traveller. That's a nice critique. Okay, so she's doing that critique as she goes. All right, she's doing a nice job in telling us what should be there, telling us what is there, and critiquing. So she's following that method. Alrighty, and she's talking about the importance of this research. Now, again, method, telling us what should be there. So she tells us that it's a descriptive phenomenology. That is right. And now this is some interesting things here. So she says the design approach used in this study was appropriate for the research conducted on the Gypsy Roma traveller community as it reliably measured and portrayed the intended attribute and can be sufficiently applied more generally to other people experiencing the phenomenon of vulnerability. And that's important. So effectively what she's saying here is they did a good job. They chose the right sort of design for the study they were doing, and that's her critique. And as I've said in other videos, your critique doesn't have to be critical. It's a comment on whether the study is robust, and she's making a comment that they've done a good job here. She's talking more about the design, and then moves on to selection of participants and sampling. Okay, so she's then saying most common is interview-based is snowball sampling, as it leads to other useful informants. And snowball sampling means that you interview somebody and you say, do you know anyone else who might be in the same situation that I could talk to? And they sort of introduce you to that person. So she goes on to talk about this. This is an appropriate sampling method for using for this particular community because they're distrustful of outsiders. Very good reason. And then she goes on to talk about the advantage of using this method is by gaining the trust of the initial gatekeeper, which is the first person or the first couple of people you talk to. The researchers were then able to get access to other people in the community. She then goes on to talk about the disadvantage of this method. And that's a really, she says, inclusion criteria set for this research is the resultant limited variation in gender of the interviewed participants, which may have limited the saturation of data. And what she's saying there is that, potentially because of this method, you may have got some more particular participants. What I'd say to that is that given the method, that's okay, and given the sort of people that you're trying to, the vulnerable community you're working in, that it's not such a problem. But she is right in what she says. Then goes on to talk about data collection, what should be there, identifies. So this is a really good comment. So as she talks about that they use semi-structured interviews. This method was appropriate for these particular participants as an estimated 70 to 80% are illiterate. So that's really important for this student to have picked up on, that the reason that interviews were valuable and semi-structured ones were valuable because these people, there's a high percentage of people who cannot read. Um, so then she goes on and talks about how they had an inclusion criteria of people being able to speak and understand English, which may have changed the demographic of the participant sample, and that's right. And she's made a nice comment there. Okay. Then talking about the analysis, the particular method that was used, which is outlined in the article. So she's talking about how it was done, and she's made the critique here. The approach chosen was appropriate for the research method as it allowed the data to be organised and structured into meaning units, which then could be transformed into reveal the nature of the participant's vulnerability. Lovely. Okay, so she said it's appropriate for the method they've used. Talking about ethics here, now she talks about the ethical issues that are likely to be a problem. So and that the benefits should outweigh the negative side of the detriment for the participants. So here she says they did it. The strategy used was related both in written and verbal form. Now this is important because previously she's told us that this particular group has a high rate of illiteracy, and so giving them a participant information sheet, which is the normal way in which research, people would get given a sheet to take home so they could refer to it, is of no value, whereas giving them the information in a written form and a verbal, reading them the formal whatever they were required to do but via the ethical approval, is a really good way of doing that. So she then goes on to talk about the discussion. So in the article discusses how the researchers achieved the aim of expressing the lived experience of vulnerability. She then talks about how there are this is effectively a limitation that she's saying here. The researchers acknowledge that the research questions asked were not specific to the field of health vulnerability, however propose the worthiness of future research investigating the specific health impact of vulnerability. So she's discussing that limitation, and then she's going on and saying they were summarised and applied to the clinical nursing practice appropriately, and that's a nice critique there. Not everything has to be critical, remember. This is her conclusion. Okay, very nice, just telling us. So a front bit, back bit, and all of the bits in the middle should be about so you got your bookends, which are your introduction, conclusion, and you've got your critique in the middle. And this again is another example of a well-rounded, well put together critique. And what you notice with most of the ones that I've done recordings on, the students tend to do well because they follow that method of what should be there, what is there, what's the difference, or have they done it well? Okay, and that method will assist students to be able to break down each section and write about it. I hope this has been helpful.